This video is a bit different than what you'll find on my channel. We're not investigating a disaster or exploring a lost town, but we are searching for a treasure in a way. We've been invited on an exclusive and extensive behind-the-scenes tour of 3 of the most iconic structures on Catalina Island in California. These buildings feature unique architecture, creative building methods, and perfectly preserved antique machinery that we will explore up close and personally.
Ready to go down?
Ready.
First, we're visiting the Catalina Island Casino, the largest building on the island and one of the most iconic waterfront structures on the West Coast. Then we're climbing up to the Avalon Chime Tower to play the mechanism for ourselves. Lastly, it's off to the Wrigley Memorial and Botanical Gardens to end our day and our adventure. Tag along for this in-depth tour here on Part-Time Explorer. Over 1 million people visit Catalina Island per year. Whether they're visiting for the fine foods, the scenic accommodations, or to explore the rugged backcountry, there's a unique draw to the island that captures the imagination of all who set foot here. While everyone's adventure here is different, there's one thing that everyone can agree on: this island sure has style. From Art Deco to Spanish Pueblo, the unique personality of the island's architecture can trace its origins back over a century. In 1919, William Wrigley Jr. purchased the Santa Catalina Island Company sight unseen. The Santa Catalina Island Company owned nearly all of Catalina Island, save for some residential and commercial property within the town of Avalon. You may already be familiar with William Wrigley Jr., owner of Wrigley's Chewing Gum and the Chicago Cubs and Wrigley Field. On his first visit to the island, he was inspired to make Avalon a recreational destination for the common person to enjoy the beaches, crystal clear waters, and the hiking trails of the island. He improved the island's infrastructure by expanding the electrical and water services and opening up more accommodations for residents and visitors. As the 1920s began to roar, the Art Deco movement took off in architecture, music, and fashion, and the island's proximity to Hollywood made it the backcountry boating destination for the elites of America and the movie stars of the silver screen. The little resort town of Avalon began to boom as a pleasure destination, and the Wrigleys, caught up in the spirit of the times themselves, spared little expense in turning Avalon into a beautiful, stylish island getaway. The crowning jewel of Avalon is without a doubt the casino sitting on the northern side of the town, an imposing and exciting welcome to anyone sailing into Avalon Harbor. This round, concrete marvel features a giant ballroom and theater and is the equivalent of 12 stories tall, making it the largest building on the whole island. Now, casino doesn't refer to a gambling hall or anything like that. The word casino actually refers to a large gathering place for social and amusement purposes. That said, let's jump back to the beginning of this beautiful building's history, to the story of a rock and a smaller casino. On the north arm of Avalon Harbor was Sugarloaf Rock, a massive, prominent hill that jutted out into the water. This was Little Sugarloaf Rock, and this was Big Sugarloaf. Big Sugarloaf being formed only slightly prior, after a rock slide separated it from the main hill. Little Sugarloaf was a landmark for mariners sailing to the island and a popular point for sightseers. In 1896, stairs were built to the top for people to climb up if they wanted to. The 2 Sugarloafs were situated on the point of land between Avalon and Descanso Canyon to the north. Now in 1915, Avalon suffered a major fire downtown, and in the efforts to rebuild, the Catalina Island Company, which ran most of the business on the island, was looking for a location for the new major hotel to replace one that was lost downtown. This arm would be the perfect spot, so Big Sugarloaf was blasted and leveled to make room for it. Well, they ended up changing their mind and building the hotel the next canyon over, and the construction site at Big Sugarloaf was abandoned. But Little Sugarloaf still stood. In 1919, when the Wrigleys bought the Catalina Island Company, they wanted to create a grand amusement and dance hall, and the vacant spot where Big Sugarloaf formerly stood was perfect. An octagonal steel frame was erected, and within a year, this was now the Sugarloaf Casino, with its large dance hall that accommodated 500 people and even had a Chinese tea room. The building was popular, but the growth of the town quickly eclipsed what the casino could handle, and in February 1928, the casino was demolished to begin construction on an even grander casino. Funny enough though, that octagonal steel frame for the old casino isn't gone. It's been repurposed into the world's largest bird cage, back in the Catalina Bird Park about a mile away. But I digress. William Wrigley placed the construction project in the hands of his go-to builder for his Catalina Island projects, an architect and engineer named David Malcolm Renton, or D.M. Renton for short. Renton was born on Prince Edward Island in Canada, moving to the United States at the age of 16 and making his way out to California a few years later. It was there, building homes in Pasadena, that he met William Wrigley and established a long-standing partnership with his Catalina Island Company. The Avalon Casino was arguably the most daunting challenge of Renton's career. One of the biggest hurdles that the casino construction team had to get over was how remote the island was. Nearly every evening during the building, a full-sized barge full of construction material from mainland California was towed the 26 miles across the channel. While the initial cost projection was $600,000, or over $10 million today, the total bill came to a staggering $2 million price tag, or around $36 million today. Honestly, even though it cost over 3 times the original projected cost, looking at the building today, it feels like it's worth a lot more than just that. Certainly, if we were to build it all over again, it would cost considerably more. To build this incredible masterpiece, 2 large 100-foot derricks were erected on site to assemble the steel frame. The cranes were put up by the Llewellyn Ironworks of Los Angeles, the same company that would be prefabricating the steel frame on the mainland and assembling it here on site. So well was the frame planned and made that it was shipped the 26 miles across the channel and assembled together, all 28,000 pieces, without a single error. Nowhere in the casino is the steel framework more visible and accessible than in the overhead loft, where the conical dome of the roof comes together. We'll be exploring this space in detail a little later. With the frame completed and in place, wooden molds were built and concrete poured into them. In some places, we can still see the impression that the wooden molds left behind.
They formed all this with fir lumber, and here you can see the grain and the knot here, and the grain and the knot here from all the form boards. All these boards were 6 inches wide.
We'll talk even more about the construction methods as we explore the very depths of this building, but suffice to say, when the casino was completed, it was an absolute triumph. May 29, 1929 was the big day. The entire town of Avalon shut down business to celebrate the grand opening of the casino, with flags flying in the streets and 10,000 people in attendance. The opening ceremonies were themselves grand, with a biplane soaring in from behind the island, landing in the water, and parking right at the foot of the casino. Off stepped King Neptune and 6 pirate ladies, carrying a small treasure chest up to the front door of the casino. Inside the chest was the golden key to open the door. The rest of the event featured fashion reviews, performances in both the theater and ballroom, and Little Miss Catalina sitting on a bed of flowers in a treasure chest greeting people upon entering. D.M. Renton received a standing ovation for his designs of the casino, but he humbly deferred all praise to the workers themselves who performed the labor. The people of Avalon were pleased, and so were the Wrigleys, who maintained a long-lasting partnership with Renton. It's 1929 and the Catalina Casino is the happening place to be in Southern California. Walking from Avalon along the curved waterfront road, guests of the casino would walk under the new Pueblo-style archway that announced Via Casino, the Casino Way. All along the walk, visitors are flanked on the left by mosaics and displays of clay tile, produced by the Catalina Island Tile Company, a world-famous company that was established alongside the development of the casino. The massive casino grows ever bigger as the visitor gets closer. By now, the jazz and big band music from within echoing out from the building onto the harbor, beckoning anyone to come in and partake in the excitement. The entrance loggia gives the visitor their first intimate impression of the theater's beauty. No longer is it the big stranger seen from across the water, but now we see the detailed spirit of the casino in these 9 massive murals. They were painted by California artist John Beckman and follow an undersea motif, but they weren't originally intended to be murals. The plan was for them to be done entirely in tile, but the Catalina Island Tile Company was so overburdened with the casino's construction that this corner had to be cut. And frankly, the hand-painted murals are now one of the most iconic features of this construction. The murals did fade over the years, and conservationists decided to redo the central mural, featuring the famous Catalina mermaid, in tile as it was originally planned. So in 1986, one of the panels finally was completed in tile. Flash back a bit to the turn of the 1900s, and setting sail from the old Sugarloaf Rock right here on this spot that we discussed earlier, Catalina's glass-bottom boats took visitors on a tour of the famous sunken gardens of the harbor, and it was these excursions that artist John Beckman wanted to capture in these murals. At the booth in the middle of the loggia is where visitors would purchase tickets.
It's actually made of cast aluminum. So back in the 20s and 30s, people would come up to that ticket booth and they'd be able to buy their tickets to a film or to a ball or a dance upstairs.
On the one end of the entryway is a pair of doors that give direct access to the upstairs ballroom, but for now, we're heading in through the main doorway, into the beautiful entry foyer. Before going into the performance, this foyer acted as a lobby for pre-show gathering and intermission. This is the theater's grand entryway. The walls are made of solid walnut, and I'm told that walnut decor actually ages like a fine wine, if you will. The more time that passes, the better that wood looks. Exploring into the original bathrooms on either flank of the 160-foot-long foyer, we find full walls of Catalina Island tile. The aisle signs above each of the 3 theater entrances are made of bronze and black glass, backlit by electric light. The foyer also has a concession stand, which was added in 1949. From here, we can get inside of the box office that we saw earlier from the outside. The clerk would sell tickets from this booth.
General register, automatic ticket register that would register how many tickets were printed so that they could keep track of how many patrons were regular ticket, seniors, and adults.
With the furniture, we have 2 different things here resembling sea motifs. We have blue sofas that, when together, are supposed to resemble a wave, and gold chairs, which look like seashells. The ceiling overhead is actually domed concrete, and in a few minutes we're going to be exploring above these ceilings to see just how that was made. But first, let's head on in and find a seat. This was the most stylish theater in Southern California, and Catalina Island was a popular filming location in the 1930s, so directors filming on the island such as Cecil B. DeMille, John Ford, and Louis Mayer would have special private screenings here as their productions progressed. The Wrigleys spared no expense developing this theater. It was built in 1928, only a year after The Jazz Singer premiered as the first Hollywood film with sound, yet the designers planned this theater with sound in mind, making it the world's first movie theater built for films with an audio track. The sound produced on stage would rise up into the dome, and then fall equally throughout the theater, producing perfect audio levels for each seat. The murals on the side of the room are actually painted onto cloth, which absorb any reverberations. This whole room was actually designed with acoustics in mind, and if you stand at the center of the room and you clap, you can hear it echo all throughout. The acoustics in the theater were so well developed and praised that the designers of the Radio City Music Hall in New York traveled here to learn from it for their own plans. And as you can see around me are these murals designed and painted by John Gabriel Beckman. And these are an Art Deco interpretation of various scenes from California history. First, we have the natives out hunting on horseback, and then we come to the friars coming through the country, and followed by Spanish galleons, and then ultimately in the back, fish and monkeys. Over the entryways are an interpretation of the iconic comedy and tragedy masks that are associated with theater history. And finally, just above the stage, front and center, is the birth of Venus. Above and flanking the stage, we see two massive gold-leaf grills. These are very decorative, but they actually have a function as well. They let in the sound from the pipe organ and allow it to fill the theater. The theater can comfortably seat 1,164 people, although it initially boasted 1,250 seats, with some being removed in renovations over time. The seats have a Spanish-styled iron base, and originally were upholstered in red velvet, while the finer seats were done in blue. General admission tickets were 50 cents and half price for kids.
Something that I thought was actually really cool is underneath of all of these seats, since these are the original 1929 seats, was a gentleman's hat rack. You come into a show, you take a seat, take your hat off, because you shouldn't wear it in the building, of course, tuck it underneath, enjoy the show. Overhead is another one of those concrete domes that we saw in the entryway, and there are silver leaf stars overhead. Some of them actually have a little light bulb behind them, and when the lights are turned down and those are turned on, they'll illuminate and twinkle like little stars.
This is a massive space, and in order to avoid having any support columns, it's these girders above that support the ceiling in a cantilevered fashion. We're above the domed ceiling of the theater below. This is the steel structure of the building that we're looking at. It's riveted and bolted, nothing up here is welded, and this orange paint, by the way, it looks like a pretty fresh coat, aside from the dust on top. But this is the original 1928-1929 coat of paint. There's very little rust up here because we're actually on the leeward side of the island, so the building doesn't necessarily get a lot of salty sea spray coming up on it. All of the ductwork above, it looks pretty brand new. It looks like it might have been installed in the last couple of years, but it is also original to the building. The ceiling of the theater is actually of concrete, and that the way that they would do that is, you might notice all of these hanging wires. They would hang them down, and they would be holding up a frame of expanded metal, and they would scaffold underneath of it, and workers would stand on that scaffolding and press up concrete into the holes between the expanded metal, and they would smooth it and work it up through the holes. Once it dried and was finished, these wires don't support much weight anymore. It's all self-supported throughout the structure. In fact, you can see a lot of these wires can easily be wiggled because there isn't that tension on it supporting the ceiling. It's all self-supported. Now, this theater was a multi-purpose theater. It was not simply movies. It did show movies. In fact, it was one of the first theaters with sound films in mind. They called them talkies. It was one of the first theater with talkies in mind. But it still also screened silent films. And with those silent films, we have this stage organ built by Page, and it has sound effects and all sorts of things to help make the silent films come to life. Even after silent films had been phased out, the Page organ was a lively attraction to the theater, with organists offering concerts throughout the year. The theater kept an organist on staff from 1929 all the way through 1964, with a few gaps here and there. The staff organists always had their official portrait taken for promotional purposes. Organist Robert Salisbury was the theater's organist for the longest period of time, treating the job with a level of devotion rarely matched by an amateur musician. He started in 1958, went away for a little bit and came back, and finally retired in 2001. The organ today can be played both manually or with a computer system.
They had sound effects, a horn like on a car. And so when there was a car scene or a siren scene of the police chasing someone, he could make that sound. It was so realistic. And he had clatter sounds like hoofs of horses, bells, and all those instruments, the real instruments, are up in the organ loft.
To really see the workings of this pipe organ, we need to climb up into the loft.
See that door up there? That's where we're putting this ladder, and that's where we gotta climb. What is all this?
These are all the electrical connections. You can just see the hundreds of wires going from all those different keys. Like here's a regular organ pipe. But then if you wanted to play a trumpet, you would have these instruments. Up here you have the siren and the bass drum and a cymbal. And then down here is like a snare drum. And right back there you'll see a tambourine. So each one of these must represent an instrument. The tuba, the post horn, the oboe, the clarinet.
Incredible.
Back on ground level and behind the stage curtains are all of the complex controls to manage the set dressing and anything else that a theatrical performance may demand, all original to 1929. In the back of the theater, looking down on it all, is the projection booth and a private screening space, one of the next stops on our behind-the-scenes tour of the Catalina Casino. The casino, as we discussed earlier, can be divided up into two primary areas, the theater below and the ballroom above. Nestled into the extra space around the theater's dome are two mezzanine floors. The lower of the two floors are auxiliary spaces for the theater, the projection room, storage, and dressing rooms for performances. The upper of those two floors is auxiliary spaces for the ballroom, such as dressing rooms for the upstairs performers. While the theater is fresh in our minds, let's explore that lower floor first, heading up from behind the stage. Now, when a production is over, the cast and the crew aren't going to walk out through the audience. They're going to exit through here, through the backstage rooms. Let's go explore those. Now, if you were wearing some sort of a costume that needed mending, there were sewing machines out here, such as this still functional free Westinghouse sewing machine. And then there's also these dressing rooms. Now, if you were an actor or an actress of any kind of note, you'd have your own private dressing room like this one or the one next door. However, if you were just a more common actor, you were in the common room. The projection room is situated directly above the central entryway to the theater and is a museum in its own right. The old projectors used in the cinema since it opened its doors are all still preserved up here, as is the Westinghouse DC generator that powered the early ones. So while there is a more modern projector in use right now, one of the things that you'd see on the behind-the-scenes tour is the theater's original simplex projector. And this was in use for about 9 or 10 years from the opening in 1929 up until 1938. Didn't have a light bulb. Instead, it had carbon arcing. So two pieces of carbon and they would be arcing off of each other and burning. And that was significantly brighter than a bulb. In fact, if you looked at it for more than a few seconds, you'd go blind if you looked directly into it. And behind it is a concave mirror, which focuses that light forward through here. And the film is going from this case to that case being fed through here, and the light is shining through it. And it comes out on that end.
And there you can see the carbons creating the bright, bright light.
And it was common for projectionists back then to take their cigarette or cigar and light it off of the carbon arc. After the simplex projectors were retired, these two Brenkert and arc projectors were put into use. And you needed two because they kind of played off of each other. Movies were getting longer by this point, but they were still being contained in film reels of about 20 minutes each. The projectionist would stand right here between the two projectors, and he would feed the first reel into one of these. He would light the arc, he'd start it rolling, the movie would start out there. And in the meantime, while that one is playing, he puts reel number 2 into the companion projector. He puts it in there, he gets that queued up and ready to go. He gets that light ready to go as well. As film reel 1 is nearing an end, a red little dot would appear at the top corner of the film, and that dot tells him to start playing that projector. And then a second red dot would appear at the top right, and that says to shut off the first one and let the second one continue rolling. These Brenkert projectors were retired in 1985, and then they switched over to this Plateer system and this other style projector, which no longer has carbon arcing. Instead, it has a bulb. You're still working off of those shorter film reels. The projectionists and the theater managers will splice the multiple reels together and set them up on here, on these discs, and that disc would feed around the room into the projector, and then after it plays, it would feed back onto this second tier where it would wind itself right back up. This projector was retired in 2012, and now they use an entirely digital system. Immediately adjacent to the projection room is a private screening room and balcony. This beautifully appointed space was perfect for a stylish viewing party, complete with a well-stocked pantry and fashionable Art Deco furniture. It's said that the room was originally the theater manager's office and private viewing space, but the well-stocked bar was his idea, and being the height of Prohibition, this didn't fly. He was promptly replaced, but notice how the bar remains. There's one last space to explore on this lower mezzanine floor, a bit of a secret place, one that you won't find on any of the tours. If we climb in here, you can actually see above the roof of the theater and ballroom entrance down below outside. So, come on in.
These are the arches, the domes above the entrance of the casino. And this is another example of that steel structure, and then tying the expanded metal to it, and then troweling the cement through from the underside. Right. So note where they hand tied these two pieces together, and then they tied on the expanded metal to this, and then they troweled the cement mixture or mortar up through the expanded metal. This is an old carbonator to make the carbonated water. And it had this weight here that would go up and down to turn the switch on and off. All electromechanical. And this is an old refrigeration compressor for the kitchen above us. Isn't that cool?
It's very cool.
I love coming in here.
In spaces like these, some trash is left over from the construction. After a while, the trash stops being trash and becomes an artifact, and I'm actually glad to see this still here. On either side of the main entrance are these two towers which branch off of the round center part of the building. And these two towers have these ramps crisscrossing back and forth going up, and these are the ramps that the people going up to the ballroom would take, and these are actually pretty reminiscent of what you would see in Wrigley's Field, the baseball stadium in Chicago, built 15 years prior, also by the Wrigley family. They went with ramps instead of stairs to better accommodate the large crowds that they anticipated for the upstairs ballroom, and the story goes that once the construction was completed, the designer's son, Arthur Renton, drove his Ford Model T up these ramps and into the ballroom. The ramps go all the way down to the ground floor to those other entry doors that we saw in the loggia, but we're going to head up from here to the upper mezzanine floor. Leaving the theater portion of the building behind, we're now in the spaces meant to service the ballroom. The North Tower ramp takes us up to the coat check. As guests would come up to spend an evening in the ballroom, they'd first want to drop off their cumbersome overcoats and hats. They'd be issued a ticket with a number on it, and that number corresponded with a cubby or a coat hanger where their belongings would be stored. To the left of the coat check is a ladies' powder room, where women would freshen up, fix their hair, or touch up their makeup before socializing upstairs. The green and coral colors keep the room in line with the marine theme of the building, while the sofas are a similar design to what we saw in the foyer. A women's bathroom branches off the powder room, still complete with the original stalls and hardware. Heading right from the coat check were two waiting room areas that have since been repurposed. The first is now a small museum space added in the 1980s, which features old photographs and plans of the building, as well as costumes and uniforms worn by staff and performers.
I have a picture of my grandmother going up here, and there was a ladder going up here, and it was a view, and you pay to go up to the top and get your photo taken.
In the 1940s, it was common for radio networks to broadcast concerts from popular live venues, and the Catalina Casino was one of those places, with CBS having their own broadcasting booth here in this space. The next room over was the second waiting room, but as early as 1948, this was redesigned into the Marine Bar and Lounge, serving drinks and light food. The bar equipment was originally in the ballroom upstairs, but moved here to make more space above and give more purpose to this space as well. The murals in this room are not original, but they are inspired by earlier ones that once graced these walls. The Marine Bar here is where the South Tower ramps come through, but going beyond that we come to a men's smoke room, complementing the women's powder room on the other side. Beyond the smoke room is a men's bathroom. Both wings of this floor featured a Bell telephone booth. Now it's time to return to those ramps and finally make our way up to the Grand Ballroom, the social center of the whole island. All right, so we've explored the theater, we've explored the mezzanine level. This way to the ballroom. The dances here featured the hottest bands and musicians, drawing crowds from all over Southern California. Steamships sailed into Avalon several times a day, but the harbor beneath the casino could accommodate over 100 private anchorages. Oftentimes guests would sail up on their private boats, anchor in Avalon Harbor, and ready themselves for a lively evening of music and dancing in the casino's ballroom. The sun is setting as the wooden motor yachts and sailboats pull into the harbor, dropping anchor with hundreds of people dressed up for the dance. Their launches take them to the dock, followed by a stroll down via casino. Coming in through the loggia, they enter the set of side doors, taking the ramps all the way up to the upper mezzanine where the guests would check in their coats and hats before proceeding further up. In the ballroom, the guests are arriving and the band is only just warming up. Dancers are already on the floor as the sun sets on the other side of the island. This ballroom underwent two major remodels back in the day, one in 1935 and one in 1947. The Marine Bar and Soda Fountain was initially located near the entrance of the ballroom, but in 1947 it was moved downstairs to where we saw it earlier, and where it was, became a kitchen. With guests coming in, this kitchen was bustling, preparing food for anyone who may wish to order something. Around the inside edge of the ballroom are two tiers of seating. When the building opened, it was only one tier of theater-style seats. giving the room a seating capacity of 450 people, but the 1947 remodel replaced these with tables and chairs and added a second tier below, shrinking the dance floor. The new layout can accommodate today anywhere from 1,000 to 1,400 seated guests. On the outside, circling almost the entire ballroom, is a long, 14-foot wide promenade, open to the sea air and the sunset, floored with Catalina tile. The balcony features 25 panels on the ceiling and ebony and ivory figures on the cornices. For anyone wishing to step away from the music, the balcony offers a refreshing place to escape for conversation, with several large doorways giving access.
When they used to have dances in here, they would have spotlights from above shining down on the dancers below. You can actually see the hole for one of those spotlights up there, covered up right now. We're gonna go up and take a quick peek at what's up there now.
So this is where they had a spotlight
Yeah?
shining down on the dancers or the stage. So this would be the ceiling of the mezzanine, probably.
Mm-hmm. What's this? How old is this, do you think?
I don't know.
It's a 3-digit phone number.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, with a few hundred, sometimes up to 1,000 people in here dancing with all of these electric lights glowing throughout the night, it gets pretty hot in here. There's no air conditioning and there's no heating in this building, but they have a natural way of cooling the dance floor down. What they would do is they would open up all of these doors along the edge of the ballroom and let the natural sea breezes come in. It would fill the room, and above, in that ceiling fixture, just behind it, there are grills, and upstairs are fans that would suck the air up so that cool breeze would be blowing in and lifting up, rising with the heat into the spaces above. That ceiling fixture at the top of the dome features a chandelier and 4 outer lights coming down from the grill, again sticking with the sea life Art Deco motif. Coming down from the dome are 32 fluted wall panels, most containing a silver octagonal medallion that stick with the theme of the island or sea. My personal favorite being the one depicting the SS Avalon, one of the steamers that serviced the island, built in 1891 and retired in 1951. At the center of this room is a 10,000 square foot dance floor made of rosewood, white oak, and maple, laid out on top of acoustic fabric paper. It's said that a loud, crowded dance could be held here in the ballroom without any sound transferring through the floor to disturb the theater below. The band initially played inside of a half-dome, seashell-like stage, but the acoustics were poor, and after remodeling it a few times, the stage was removed entirely in 1947 and replaced with a movable platform, which is still in use today. Taking a peek up on stage behind the curtains in the ballroom, we see a massive switchboard, and this would operate the lights in the room, the curtains, and actually everything is labeled. So we see the ceiling fixtures, we see ceiling spotlights, general lights. Still functions today, and the lights for the promenade. It's amazing, such antique, massive machinery still in use and running so well. On the new 1947 platform stage, even a large brass band could be accommodated, with big names in big band appearing here nightly. My friends and I attended the Avalon Ball hosted by the Los Angeles Art Deco Society, at which we got a small glimpse of what this room was like back in the day. The dress code was formal and the dances would go well into the night, but when the music finally was over, it was time for guests to leave behind the lively casino, taking a warm moonlit walk back to their boats or the steamer dock. The casino stopped hosting nightly dances in 1965, after decades of serving host to new friendships and romances. When the ballroom first opened in 1929, it was the largest circular ballroom in the world, made an even greater feat given the fact that there were no internal support pillars in this room. It was all held up by girders in a cantilevered fashion. Earlier, we saw the girders that were above the theater that also propped up the ballroom's dance floor. Now we're climbing up above the ballroom as well, into the highest reaches of the casino to look at the massive web of steel that holds the whole building together.
Up above the ballroom, you can see the many circular windows that line just beneath the rooftop. But you can see that quite plainly from the water. It's one of the distinguishing features of the building.
Climbing up the girders, we can look down and see yet another example of the concrete arches framed with expanded metal, like the ones we saw above the theater and entryway, but these are for the 32 fluted panels for the ballroom.
Whoa.
From up here, we can look down through the central grille above the light fixtures.
Here we're getting at the top of the casino, and we can see all the structural elements coming together. When we were in the ballroom, Tom talked about the hot air coming up through this grill, and here you can see the openings in the grill. And then it goes up behind this wall here, and behind this wall is a huge fan to pull the air up through the grill and then push it out through the tower of the building. Here you can see how huge this fan is. It's about 6 feet in diameter.
The complex ventilation and fan system weaves its way between the girders and beams, but we need to climb up through them in order to access the central tower rising up from the roof.
So now we're in what I call the tower, almost the very top of the casino. And you can see where people over the years have carved their initials.
94, 89, 91. Leroy Chick Laws, May 31st, 8:30 a.m., 1939. I bet that's going to be the oldest we're going to find up here.
I couldn't find a globe on the market, but I was at a friend's house and he had this big pickle jar. And I go, gosh, I can use a gallon pickle jar as the globe on that light. And there it is up there.
One of Charlie's jobs with the casino is to change out the flags flying on the roof. Most of the time it's just multicolored flags of his choosing that are flying. But as we're getting ready for Memorial Day when we filmed this, I went up top to help him fly patriotic flags. Most people don't know this, but the South Tower has a private apartment at the top of it, one of the best residential views on the island, I suppose. So we had to come out onto the roof through the North Tower instead. We hung up several American flags, interspersed with the flags of every branch of the military, including the newly formed Space Force. Naturally, we wore safety harnesses when working up here. Coming back down from the top, let's take the elevator. Before boarding the elevator, though, we had the unique opportunity to climb up from the ballroom promenade up to the elevator hoist above, where we got to see the machinery in action.
This is all original.
Wow.
This antique Otis freight elevator is original to the building and today allows for direct handicap access to the upper floors.
Ready to go down?
Ready.
Yeah, sometimes after an event, there'll be workers coming down and they'll make the elevator shake, just having fun. It'll open a switch up there and the elevator just stops. And there's only a few of us that know how to fix it.
The ground floor is today a dive shop, but served multiple purposes over the years, from restaurant storage to a model railroad to stagecoach housing to the Catalina Island Pottery Shop to the previous location of the Catalina Island Museum.
Here's an example of how thick the walls in the casino are. And this looks like Catalina aggregate that they use.
Today, the dive shop offers visitors a convenient location to pick up gear to use when diving the beautiful waters off of the island. However, one of the best sites for diving is actually right here under the casino, in the famous sunken gardens of Avalon. Going deeper into the ground floor and even a bit below it, we can find the basements of the building.
Directly in front of us is the huge fan that would push hot air to the theater.
None of this works anymore?
Well, let's give it a try.
Oh.
Oh, look, it's working, Tom. Here you can just see how beautifully smooth and quiet it is.
During wartime, the casino served various branches of the armed forces. Sure, the theater and ballroom were used to entertain the troops, but the ground floor also acted as an armory during the Second World War.
The casino was also a civil defense shelter, so scattered all throughout it, you'll still see some of the Cold War era supplies that were stocked into this building.
1963, Civil Defense Carbohydrate Supplement.
Have you tried one of those?
No.
Do you plan to?
No. I love sweets, not these.
The casino's operators have taken a proactive role in the island's community, supporting all sorts of events for schools and organizations, even at one point letting the local school basketball team play in the ballroom when they had no other court to play on. The casino is both the first and last thing that you see coming and going from the island, and from the moment of its inception, the Casino of Avalon was arguably the heart and soul of the island. Stepping out of the Avalon Casino, you may be greeted by the chiming of the hour coming from the Catalina Chimes Tower just up the hill. This tower predates the Avalon Casino by a few years. Now, around 1924, Mrs. Wrigley envisioned a chime tower for the town. Now, these were popular in the day because still in the 1920s, only a percentage of the population were carrying watches around, and especially in a beach town like Avalon, very few of them carried their watches to the beach. So she wanted something that was going to echo out across the whole canyon and let everybody know what time it was, especially if they were down at the beach. Staying loyal to their home in Chicago, Mrs. Wrigley contracted the Deegan Chimes Company of Chicago to supply the chimes for the tower. Most chime towers play a little tune called Westminster Chimes, and in order to play Westminster Chimes, you only need 5 notes. However, Mrs. Wrigley wanted the chime tower to be able to play songs to greet the steamers coming in and to make it a memorable experience for everyone in Avalon. So instead of just 5 chimes, this tower has 20 chimes, which can all be played from a keyboard down below. The chimes' quarterly tolling was automated, but a keyboard was connected to the chimes, which allowed them to be played manually. The wire for the keyboard was run from the chimes all the way down the hillside, halfway across town, and out onto the pier where a keyboardist would play specific tunes upon the arrival of steamers into Avalon. Was a famous musician arriving? Maybe they'd be greeted by their newest popular hit. A dignitary or a celebrity? The chimes may welcome them with a special march. The chimes acted as a way to make everyone arriving by steamer feel special and excited.
This keyboard and generator and this whole mechanism used to be down on the steamer pier. But then the wires coming up here from the steamer pier failed, and they asked the electrician for the company to move all this mechanism up here because the wires had failed. But when it was down on the pier, it was in this little room and there was a glass door, and I used to sit there for hours, well, not hours, the most 14 minutes, to wait until the I could see the Westminster mechanism going around and hear the generator start and playing it. So I'd get my, just short moment of delight.
The chimes were placed high on the hilltop so that their sound would carry across the harbor and valley. The architectural style incorporates elements of a Spanish fortress, and when viewed from the harbor, it does look like a fortress thanks to the 3 faux walls. The style is a callback to the days when the Spanish missions and mighty galleons dominated this land. The chimes first rang in 1926, with Mr. and Mrs. Wrigley listening from their home. Popular Western novelist Zane Grey wrote to Mrs. Wrigley expressing his love for the chimes, and even went so far as to build his mansion just down the road from them a year or 2 later. The chimes became an integral part of life in Avalon. It would tell kids when to come home from the beach, or it would tell you when cocktail hour was, or if you were waiting for a friend to come in on one of the steamers, it would give you an idea of how much longer you had to wait. In a lot of ways, it really became one of the sounds of Avalon. Westminster quarters were used to indicate the quarters of the hour. So you've actually just heard the first quarter of the Westminster quarters. These were originally called the Cambridge quarters because they originated from Cambridge, England, at St. Mary's Church there. But they were such a popular tune that when they built Westminster Tower in downtown London and stuck Big Ben Bell at the top of that, they used that tune and it became known as Westminster Chimes. Now, of course, the way that Westminster Quarters works is you can tell what time it is by what plays. If it plays all 4 quarters of the song, it means you're on the hour, and then that's followed up by a chime of either 1 through 12 notes, and that chiming indicates the hour that it is. If you only hear 1 quarter, it means it's a quarter past the hour. If you hear 2 quarters, it's half past. If you hear 3 quarters, it's 45 minutes past the hour. But it only chimes the count of the hour on the hour. The chimes are a special bronze alloy. They're 78% copper and 22% tin, and that gives it this sharp, crisp sound, and that's actually a pretty common ratio with chimes. This is D. D is the lowest note on this scale. It is over 11 feet long, and it is 352 pounds. The smallest note, on the other hand, up there, which is A, is 92 pounds. The chime mechanism uses electronic relays when the keyboard is played, which uses strikers against the chimes.
And here's the head that flies out, strikes the note, and then retracts. Nearly 100 years old, still works perfectly.
Remarkable.
Yeah, it is.
The mechanism is in its original condition and remains extremely reliable, being hardly worn out after nearly 100 years. A testament to the standards that the Wrigleys required for their island, and the quality that the Deegan Chimes Company provides.
You have to play them slowly and deliberately.
Okay.
In 2013, the Santa Catalina Island Company deeded the Chimes Tower to the Catalina Island Chimes Tower Foundation, a non-profit corporation that aims to preserve and maintain these chimes and is in the process of refurbishing the tower as well. And if you're interested in making a donation towards them, they accept donations either by mail or online at catalinachimes.org. While there are countless places throughout Avalon where the impact of the Wrigleys and their unique Catalina style can still be seen, there's one more stop on our detailed tour of the island's icons: the Wrigley Memorial and Botanical Gardens. In 1932, William Wrigley Jr. passed away. A memorial was built deep in the canyon, as if sitting back on a throne and overlooking the town and harbor. To get here, one must walk quite a ways from the center of the town to the deepest notch in the mountainside. On the way back to the memorial, we passed the baseball fields, where Wrigley brought his Chicago Cubs for spring training. The memorial sits among the Botanical Gardens, initially a personal project of William's wife, Ada, started in 1935 to showcase various plants from across the island. The gardens fell into disarray during the Second World War, but were restored by the Wrigley family and local landscaper Mark Hafes in the 1970s. Today, the gardens feature over 100 plants and fauna native to Catalina and the surrounding Channel Islands of California. The memorial itself was begun in 1933, taking less than a year to design and build. It was designed by Chicago architectural firm Bennett, Parsons, and Frost, and like the gardens around it, it was meant to draw on local resources and highlight material from the island, although some green marble and concrete had to be sourced from Georgia on the East Coast. Like the casino and Chime Tower, the Wrigley Memorial is made of concrete, with 114 tons of reinforcing steel on the inside. The concrete was sanded as much as possible to expose the Catalina aggregate on the inside. The tower at the top is 80 feet tall, the height of the entire structure being 180 feet. The bronze doors at the bottom of the memorial also had to be sourced from elsewhere, having been cast and made in Chicago, being the final parts added to the memorial when it was completed. From the doors, we ascend the steps to the top. The blue flagstone on the terraces comes from Little Harbor on the other side of the island. All throughout are beautiful tile mosaics from the Catalina Island Tile Company, which worked hard to add color to the many cement structures being constructed at the time around Avalon. It was made to be the final resting place of William Wrigley Jr. and his wife Ada. While William was briefly interred here, his body was removed after World War II and moved to the mainland. His wife Ada rests alongside him at that new location. It's been said that the memorial, as it was originally built as a tomb, has additional niches behind some of the tile works. If someone were to be buried here, the tile would have to be smashed through, so the original builders placed a supply of replacement tiles in each of these chambers so that it could be sealed back up. While the mausoleum today is empty, it still serves its purpose as a memorial to what the Wrigleys did for this island. Today, the small town of Avalon goes to great lengths to preserve these classic treasures of its history, keeping them in use and open to the public for visitation and tours. The casino, the Chime Tower, and the Botanical Gardens are a must for anyone visiting Catalina Island for the first time. I want to thank my friend Charles Canby for inviting me out to the island and hosting us while we filmed this. This project was his idea, and his knowledge of the 3 sites made this tour truly special, and I hope it was special for you too. An additional thank you to the Catalina Museum for Art and History for helping with this documentary and several of my previous ones by sharing their wonderful archive and research with me. Lastly, a thank you to the Catalina Island Company, as well as Jeff Rusak and Allison Wrigley Rusak for all that they've done for the island and letting us film this in-depth tour of its gems. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for more content like this. Consider joining my YouTube channel memberships or Patreon at the link in the description below. A special thank you to my supporters on Patreon, especially Marlo Perez, Kelly Black, Kaiser Wilhelm II, Kaiser Friedrich III, Zach Richards, Donald Anderson, Cody Henricks, Joan Haynes, Sean Kimball, Glenn Biddiscombe, Stephen Schwankerts, Gabriel Colomb, RGB, Tara Mullakar, Keith Holland, Rob M., Amos Mayhew, Corey Andrews, Nicholas Masella, Colt Tanik, Sophie Baber, Rob, Oliver Chin-Chen, John Maluski, David Watipka, Tiffany Raridan, Mad Time Media, Nathan Gutierrez, Max Metcalf, David Littlejohn, Sean Sahi Frazier, Nikki Chan 92, Corbin McDonald, Matthew Burns, Goblin of the Salt Plains, Luke Steven, Gordon Robbins, Aaron Stark, Troy Wentworth, Clarkey, Sam Forker, Busy B, Christopher Rosendale, Road Weary, Kitty Bits, Taniel, Kenzo Bewick, Brian Reedy, Eden Cleefish, Bless Moles, Coda Yoda 16, Carol Adams, Clay Hobbs, Steve Valley, and Gojira Strains.